Good evening, everyone. I'm Nicholas DiMancio, Head of Architecture here at MIT. I extend my thanks and welcome to all of you for joining us here in person and online for this, our first event of the fall 2022 lecture series. On behalf of myself, on behalf of the department, but also on behalf of Yolanda Daniels, Lecture and Exhibitions Committee Chair, who can't be here to deliver this opening to our series herself tonight, but deserves to be given the thanks for the enormous, amazing efforts she and the rest of the Lecture and Exhibits Committee, JG, Huma Gupta, Aidan Flynn, and Amanda Moore, and many others have given to help us all be here tonight and this amazing series to kick off. I'll proceed with our land acknowledgement. MIT acknowledges Indigenous people as traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land on which we stand tonight is the traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of their territory. And we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. Tonight's lecture will relaunch a continuing conversation on where we are now, hosted at our department's unique intersection of design and research. This semester, we will confront and complicate carbon-free building practices, designs for good health, quarantine histories and futures, social responsibility, the climatic turn, colonial building on Indigenous lands, power systems, and as ever, designing for the unknown. At each event, we invite in-person visitors and remote audiences to study and question how architecture shapes the ways we move within, around, and through the spaces we take up, be they physical or immaterial, real or imagined. Of course, also the spaces we've taken for granted and learned not to take for granted, like the pleasure of being with you all here tonight. This series is a collaboration between the faculty, staff, and students of MIT's Department of Architecture, which includes architects, designers, urbanists, historians, critics, theorists, artists, social entrepreneurs, and experts in computation and building technology. This semester will also inaugurate our collaboration with MIT's new Morningside Academy for Design and an urgent conversation on design and its possibilities across MIT and into the world beyond. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to Roy Salgueiro Barrio, who has invited tonight's guests, the directors of the 15th Spanish Architecture and Urbanism Biennial, to join us for a conversation about their work and the future of architecture in Spain and beyond. Roy Salgueiro Barrio is an architect and urbanist whose work focuses on the interrelations between architecture, territorial organization, and globalization. He is the founder of design practice RSAU, a lecturer in our department, I'm very happy to say, and the curator-director of the MIT Morningside Academy for Design. Roy is the author with Hashim Sarkis and Gabriel Kozlowski of The World as an Architectural Project, and he was principal assistant curator for the 17th International Architecture Exhibition La Biennale di Venezia, where it was my great pleasure to share a spritz with him last year. His research and work has been published widely, and we are enormously proud to have him as a part of our department community. So, Roy, I will give it over to you to introduce our lecturers tonight, and thank you so much for not only this lecture, but everything you do here for us.
Okay, does it work now? Yes? Okay, fantastic. So hello, thank you everyone for coming this evening to this first lecture of the academic year with the curators of the latest Spanish Biennial of Architecture and Urbanism, Ana and Eugeni Bach, and Óscar Miguel. So the title of the Biennale is Full Spain, Empty Spain, Conciliation Strategies. And the Spanish Architecture and Urbanism Biennial has been operating already since 1991. One of its main objectives is to recognize and reward a set of high-quality works which represent the most outstanding panorama of Spanish architecture and urban planning in the years covered by the call. The curators of this edition, Ana, Eugeni, and Óscar, draw their attention to the dual character of the Spanish territory, geographically and statistically, and from the perspective of population density, in the same geographical framework, two drastically different territorial realities coexist. As if it were a country within another, the dense coastal areas surround a vast and extremely sparsely populated territory, with the drastic exception of the central area formed by the capital of the country, Madrid. This differentiation between a very dense territory and an empty one poses several challenges for architecture and urbanism, since common concepts such as housing, services, public space must be planned and developed attending to the geographical and social reality in which they are rooted. The selected and awarded projects of the Biennial allow us to have an X-ray of the architectural panorama in Spain of the last 3 years and give us the possibility to ask how should architecture approach concepts with such, contexts with such different meanings in the two territories. So this is the overall framework of the Biennale, and Eugeni and Ana will explain more in detail, and Óscar. The three of them are architects, also like educators. Óscar Miguel is an educator and architect. He holds a PhD in architecture. His thesis was called Bach, 1928-1939, on the history of the modern movement in Spain. He teaches in the Faculty of Architecture in Valladolid, and he works as well in a studio called Contextos de Arquitectura. His work has been widely published and has received several recognitions and prizes in Spain and abroad, and has been recently showcased in the Spanish pavilion in the latest edition of the Venice Biennale. Ana and Eugeni is a Barcelona-based Finnish and Spanish architectural studio. Both Ana and Eugeni teach architecture in EINA and in the UAB and in the ETSAP, the Polytechnical University of Catalonia in Barcelona. Their architecture and artistic interventions have been widely published and have received several awards in Spain and abroad, being recently showcased in the last edition of the Lisbon Architectural Triennale. Their production includes the installation Missing Materiality on the Mies van der Rohe's and Lily Rijk's Barcelona Pavilion. So this evening, Ana will give the lecture alone, and then Eugeni and Óscar will join her later for a conversation with me, and also with two of our students here, Angela Loescher-Montal and Inge Geraldine Donovan. Ana will speak in English, Eugeni will speak in English. I think Óscar will feel a little bit more comfortable speaking in Spanish. And Angela, among other things, apart from participating in the conversation, will help us a little bit with the translation. So that's all on my side for the time being. Please, Ana, join us, and let me connect your PPT here.
Okay, can you hear me? It's okay.
Oh. This is the moment in which nothing works, right? I think maybe just need a little bit more space. This is funny because it, okay, now it is, okay. So you're here, right?
Thank you very much, Roy. Thank you very much, Nicolas. It's a pleasure to be here today, especially if it's the first session inaugurating this great series of talks. It's my pleasure to introduce the Spanish Architecture and Urbanism Bienal. You probably are not very familiar with the event. It's the most important architecture happening in the Spanish context, like the Spanish national context. And as Roy said, it has been going already for 30 years. And we are on the 15th edition of this Bienal. So it already has a certain tradition. The Bienal started very much around the architectural prizes, but later on it has gathered all kinds of events and happenings around it, and also very much critical conversation. So it's a very important thing in architectural world in Spain. Roy already, thank you very much for the introduction. I will, as the Biennial probably is very unknown for you, so probably its curators, Óscar, Eugeni, and myself, we're not very well known here. So I will just give a brief introduction because it's part of the DNA of the Spanish Biennial, that the curators are practicing architects. So Óscar in Valladolid, he has his practice. Me and Eugeni, we have our practice in Barcelona. And since the first edition of the Spanish Biennial, the curators have been practicing architects, well-recognized, well-known practicing architects in Spain, and often also with a relationship to the academic world and to the universities. This relationship in general in Spain is very tight. The universities are happy to count with people who are also in the other side somehow of the border of academy and practice. Óscar is very well known in Spain for his work on elderly people, and this image, for example, represents a very beautiful project of his in Valladolid, which has to be introduced also like the empty Spain in this context. I will get back to that. He also has projects that are very involved with the local communities, like with this project for a public swimming pool complex in a very, very tiny village using local materials, but at the same time prefabricated elements that are often used in the more industrial buildings, but that are very present anyway also in the village landscape of Spain. Or a refurbishment of a public park in Palencia with this beautiful reflection of the vegetation. In his introduction, Roy already mentioned this installation of Missing Materiality. This is a project from our studio with Eugeni from 2017, where we dressed the Barcelona pavilion, the Miss Van der Rohe pavilion, with this white dress, and somehow removed the materiality of the pavilion. It was an opportunity to test what does materiality really mean in architecture, and what does it really do to the architecture when all the planes suddenly are the same. The floor plan is exactly the same, but the architecture changes completely. This is a refurbishment project of an old chocolate factory for a housing project. And we will get back to the fact that each time more and more the architecture acts on already built environment. This especially in the European context that we come from. Or a small housing project in Barcelona playing with popular elements and the kind of anonymous architecture of the city, in this case doing this little gesture to try to form a group or a family of not so fortunate architectures that are neighboring our plot. Okay, the Bienal. As I told you before, we are in the 15th edition, and each different edition has different curatorship, different directors, and also a theme. And we were asked to work on conciliation strategies, and we were free to think about it from the point of view that we thought that would have some kind of relevance in architecture and in Spanish architecture especially. And we thought of this huge contrast between the different Spains, the two Spains that are in the same country and that are very clearly illustrated in this map of Spain, where the empty Spain forms some kind of a donut inside of the coastal area, and then with the hole inside of it as it's like a negative of a donut, because the empty area is the actual donut. But this is a reality, and the difference is really drastic. We can imagine that also in the scale of, or the case of United States, something a little bit similar could happen. But in Europe, this is a very, very specific case. In Europe, there is no other country that would share in its territory such dense areas and such empty areas. As we are in MIT, you probably know maths, and you can see that the percentages they don't match. That's because in these percentages, the capital cities of the empty Spain are removed to illustrate somehow the territorial reality that it's really, really striking. So we can imagine that in these dense areas, the problematics of land use or the social problems or the housing or the production or the agriculture is absolutely operating with different rules than in the white areas where the price of land, for example, is absolutely different. Very often when we talk of empty and full, it sounds much smarter in Spanish, it has to be said. This España vacía, España llena seems to work better in Spanish than in English. This full Spain, empty Spain, it sounds like a glass of water or something like that. But in any case, the full Spain is not only urban, it's also rural. There's also rural areas in the full Spain, rural areas that receive a lot of pressure to be urbanized. They receive a lot of pressure of being visited as leisure areas, and the meaning of the rural in the full coastal area and in the center is completely different than the countryside or the production areas in the empty Spain. The empty Spain also contains cities, and some of them are not small towns, but they are real cities. But what is characteristic to these areas that the general density is really low and it's getting lower. So it's losing population all the time. And the full Spain is all the time gaining more density. So these differences, the social, the economical, the production, and so on and so forth, it all the time gets more and more further and further from each other. Going back to the Biennial and somehow the relevance of this event in the Spanish context, it is based on the awards on architecture and urbanism projects, and now we will see that there were other categories as well. But to show a little bit the volume of projects that we have been going through, and somehow we have been able to gather as material for further reflection and further thought. We had 581 entries on the category of architecture and urbanism, which we selected 160 works. We had 60 finalists, and finally 20 awarded works that I will present today to you. But then there was also other categories like the university diploma works, 250 entries, 19 finalists, 8 awarded, or research works and publications, 204 entries, and 29 finalists, 8 awarded, or research work, in this case more practical research work and products. So innovation would be maybe better than research work. Here, 61 entries, 11 finalists, and 4 awarded. This is a smaller category because it's also a fairly new one. Okay, and as a new category, totally unique at the moment for this edition, has been the selection of these awarded, 21 awarded photography prizes. Here, the convocatory was absolutely open to everyone. So the idea was to see how people, affection photographers, professional photographers, whoever who takes photographs, how we all take photographs nowadays, how do they look at architecture and how do they see architecture? And the truth is that we got really, really a very nice selection of entries with these 55 finalists and 21 awarded. And all this material is gathered to a catalog, this yellow book that is made of each edition. But this book has to be thought of really like a catalog of the awarded and finalist works, but it's, it shouldn't be thought as conclusions of the thematic of empty and full Spain, because this was made in the beginning when we receive and we award all these works. And after that, what has happened? We held an exhibition in Barcelona in front of the Barcelona pavilion, and then we had another exhibition in Valladolid. The whole idea here, working with the full and empty Spain, is that we have a representation from the both territorial realities. Óscar representing the empty part, working from Valladolid, which is in Castilla León, a very demographically punished area, losing population all the time. In fact, Valladolid is not losing population. It's one of the towns that it has been able to even gain, and now with the pandemic, it has even gained a little bit more of population. But anyway, very conscious of the situation there. And then Eugeni and myself, we have practice in Barcelona, and so what we did is to organize part of the events of the Biennial in Barcelona and part of the events in Valladolid, and it was really beautiful to see how well it was received in the empty part of the nation, of the country. The feeling that nothing ever happens elsewhere than in the capitals, elsewhere than in the coastal area, it's very strong. And this is something that from the dense part of the country, very often it's not registered. It's not seen that there is this urge for things to happen also in the rest of the country. Anyway, I'll get back to the presentation. There was this exhibition in Barcelona based on giant-size photographs taken of the 20 awarded works. So basically, it was very well, not even self-explaining. It was an exhibition, almost an installation, that what it aimed to do was to immerse the visitors to these architectures with these big-scale photographs that you could go through, and you could somehow have a walk inside these different architectures. The idea was not so much to explain the works, but to bring these architectures closer to the normal people, the pass-byers, the people who go for a run at 6 o'clock in the morning, the people who pass by with their dogs. And the whole idea was to take the works out from the museums, out from the institutions, and bring them closer to the people. So what we did is, with these fragmented photographs that are actually now exposed in New York, in the Instituto Cervantes in a smaller scale, but the the thing was to get interested. And then there's a QR code and you get to the web page of labienal.es and you can get all the full information of the projects. To expose architecture is something very difficult. Architecture exhibitions often tend to be a bit boring because architecture is something that opens up little by little, with a little bit of effort, work. You have to read plans, explanations, and so on and so forth. And it's something that for the big public, often it gets distant. And especially if it's closed into an institution, it stays in the collective of architects, and it's somehow very easily very inbred. So one of our goals or aims was to bring it closer to regular people. Here you can see some images of these fragmented photographs. These zigzag images were mounted the way that from one side you saw the awarded architecture, and from the other side you could see the context of the awarded architecture. So sometimes a very banal housing block just in front of the awarded, supposedly incredible architecture, or motorbikes parked, or sometimes trash. So it was a very somehow objective view of these architectures. And they are not exactly architecture photographs in a way that they are not commissioned by the architect to a photographer to take beautiful photos of their work. Instead of that, we commissioned Jordi Bernadó, who is a very interesting Spanish photographer, who started as an architecture photographer, but then later on passed more to the side of art. And he did his vision. And part of the exhibition is a video also just filmed with an iPhone. And somehow giving the experience, that's the way we often see the world nowadays. So that was a bit the idea of the exhibition. In Valladolid, the context is absolutely different. It's in this marvelous building of, now with the change of language, Patio Herreriano, exactly. Absolutely classical context. Also the design of the exhibition changes. It's not anymore this free flow of people, but it's more a corridor. And this exhibition showcases all the finalist works as well, and is already a curatorial project in a way that we organize the information in sections and thematics, and this is more of a dense and informative exhibition. Other events that, like side events that we organized was debates around living together, territory, community, resources. This happened in Barcelona as the exhibition was showcasing the awarded works and was a little bit sterile in that way. So we had the side program that went more deeply into the theme, and with different talks. And in Valladolid, what we organized, as we had this very dense and informative exhibition, we organized a congress with the awarded works. So in a way, we wanted to have this double capital of the Bienal, sharing the material but not repeating the same content. Here are the participants in the Congress, which are the 20 awarded studios in the Spanish studios. Here we have an overall glimpse of all these 20 awarded projects, and now I will go through them. I will explain more into detail some of them, and some I will just pass with one photograph. But what we have done is to organize them in three groups. All of the works could be more or less in any of the groups, but somehow the grouping has made in order to understand some of the starting conclusions that we may draw of how architecture actually acts or works in these two very, very different contexts. In the donut map, with the red dots, we have marked the awarded works, and you can of course see that there are more awarded works in the full Spain than in the empty Spain, which is absolutely natural because there's a lot more happening in the full areas. There's more economical activity, there are more people, there are more clients, there are more studios, but it's very interesting to see also then the differences between the rural contexts, the more urban contexts also inside the fuller areas. Okay, first conclusion or first observation, more than conclusion, observation of the awarded works and also the finalists and the presented works in general is that in Europe we are in the situation of our environment being built already. There are no new large development areas or development projects. Maybe densification is happening, but anyway, large part of our environment, both in the empty parts of Spain and the full parts of Spain, they already have a lot of constructed environment. So what we have is that we architects work on that constructed environment and this existing fabric, making it more dense, making it work better, somehow conciliating with the reality that we already find. The first example that I show you is this Fabra and Coats social housing project, which is special in our context because it's the first time that an industrial building is turned into a social housing. A lot of, or several projects of converting all industrial buildings to some lofts, more or less luxurious lofts or upper class lofts, of course, have been done. Several old fabric or industrial buildings have been turned into artists' workspaces, co-working spaces, company offices, and so on. But social housing normally in Spain is always based on new construction. We do new buildings for housing, and the public housing projects actually in Spain, they are very important for the innovation in housing in general. In the private sector, it's more difficult to innovate. It works more with the rules of market, and there is less space for rethinking the housing. But in the public housing still, this happens. And in this case, it happens in this old textile factory surroundings, where we have this beautiful end of 19th century building with a very regular structure, open spaces, and what we really appreciated in this project with the jury is the capacity of making common space and shared space in this old building, and also this way showing the existing or the value of the existing building, the identity of the factory building. And the housing in itself, they are these wooden blocks, kind of container space inside the factory in itself. Another example of existing fabric, but in an urban scale or urban situation, very dense urban structure of Córdoba in southern Spain, where the traditional city structure is based on very dense, fairly low buildings that breathe through patios in these very, very deep blocks. And this is an operation where office space is constructed inside this built existing fabric, inserting different floors, different spaces, and where the property is really not a simple simple sum of square meters or square feet, as you would put it, but they may be on the top of other properties, and a very, very complex project, and with a precious result, also appreciating this idea of the patio sometimes having to cross from one side to another, but in a delicate way, detaching the building from the ground and letting the patio pass both under and over. In this project of private art collection, doing a museum space in Cáceres, this would be an example of an operation in the empty part of Spain. And here the existing fabric is a fabric of city, where the actual city center is formed in two very different levels. There's an old part of the city center, an old center, quite a noble, constructed since the medieval, but mostly in the 18th century. And then on the lower level, the new expansion of the city from the 50s, 60s, 70s of last century. So what this museum building does is not only build a space for exhibiting the art, but also a system of changing level, bringing the people from one level to another level, and connecting these very, very separated parts of the city with a walkway, and this way showing how architecture can mediate and can connect to different spaces. And even if it's a private art collection, there's the possibility to somehow participate in the public spaces and in the connectivity of the city. A winery in the interior part of Catalonia, showing how a very large industrial building is inserted to an old city structure with only one photograph, and I don't bring more. It may seem aggressive, but this is actually happening all the time, and it has always happened in the small villages that the industry has been a part of them. The agricultural industry has always had their storage spaces and production spaces, and this is somehow an example of an uncomplex way of continuing that tradition, but adding a very careful quality of dealing with the detail. And also this project could be also in another category, treating with sustainability and building technology, because it's very interesting in that way, and I really recommend you to check this project up. I could talk for half an hour of each of the projects, and that's not maybe a good plan today. And there are plenty to talk of. So I will just pass with one photograph many of the projects, and I invite you to go to check them and to spy on the labienal.com.es. And you will find more information of all these projects. And many of these projects have also been largely published in especially Spanish architecture journals like Arquitectura Viva or others. In this case, there's just an empty plot that is too small to be constructed in the town of Ulot, where maybe you know these architects are CCR. Anyway, and there's this plot that can't be constructed, but nobody's interested. And anyway, the firewall of the building behind is private, so it's not public responsibility. And there's just this scenery in the city that is not very pleasant or is very unfinished. And what the architecture studio of Un Parell d'Arquitectes does is an urban scenery, kind of a festive, decorative element that resolves this problem in a totally unexpected way, also introducing very local information and meanings in this almost like altered, like construction that is just to fill a gap in a city, fill a gap that nothing actually could be done because it was a private plot but too small to be constructed ever. In the convocatory, all kinds of works from very small scale architecture to urbanism were accepted and were presented, and these projects struck out in two ways. There is an urban context of archaeology. There is these Iberian ruins next to Toledo, next to the city of Toledo, and it's just a field filled with ruins, filled with a not existing anymore city, but having all the archaeological excavations there. And this field of ruins represents a problem of connectivity because there is the lower part of Toledo is formed of a couple of villages, and there was no whatsoever connection, pedestrian connection between these two areas. So in these areas, it's very tempting to take the car anyway, because the distances may be long, because it's very easy, everybody has a car, everybody has a spot for a car. So this doesn't seem to be a priority, but on the other hand, you are in a place where there are actually things to see, so there is this archaeological happening there. There's free space, free air. I think that also the COVID epidemic somehow has showed us that to be able to take a walk is essential. And so this architecture studio, or in fact, university professors of the Toledo school, they thought of a way to build a road without interfering with the archaeological excavations that were made before. So what is done is that they construct this path on the top, but with building with soil, enough so that the rooting of the trees can be controlled over the archaeological event, and in that way, there's this high path that crosses from one part of the urban area or the village to the other part of the urban village. What we really appreciated here is that just a path, a footpath and trees can change totally a landscape and can change totally the relationship with one urban area to another urban area, or with one area to another area. So just somehow the intelligence of just doing a path and trees, we thought that was absolutely great. There are no benches, there is no lights, there's no extra decoration. It's just a path and the trees. Built context can be also an urban situation where the project, the architect's work is not so much in giving a form, but designing a process. And in this case, the prize, the award was to award a very carefully done and beautiful process of participation and detailed design of these urban spaces together with the neighbors of San Sebastian, of this specific neighborhood. Another specific value that the Spanish architecture at its best gives and somehow helps to conciliate with these very different realities is a certain contextualization, and I will give some examples to you. This is a very small project in a small village in one of these empty parts of Spain that has a very specific landscape of fields. And what the architects do is they are commissioned of a small square, and actually they make it a little bit larger understanding the whole village center as a square, as a public space. And the operation is very simple, just taking this idea of the map of the fields into the city or to the village, and doing this texture that somehow controls the scale, marks clearly that the cars are not welcome anymore, and does these small areas for sitting and chatting or drinking water or just sitting down. And what we found very smart is this furniture that in Spain, mostly the public furniture is anchored to the terrain. Not like here in MIT that we have seen lovely wooden chairs scattered everywhere. This in Spain, it would last for one day, and all these lovely chairs would end up in the living rooms and terraces of people. And this is just a cultural thing, but it is how it happens. The fact of painting these chairs, having a very specific furniture and painting it yellow, in this small community where everybody knows each other, you couldn't bring one of these to your home. Everybody would know that they are the chairs of everyone. It's not, it would be a shame to find a yellow chair at a home of somewhere. And in this way, the whole urban area turns into a common living room for the people. Also in these small villages, in the summer when it's really hot, it's so common, and it has always been a tradition that in the evening when the sun sets, the people get out from their homes, and that's a very social moment also. So here, the thing is that as architects, we have to understand the context. And the context is much more than the physical, much more than the map of fields. It is more to understand how people act, how people, what are their routines, what is the tradition, what are the new traditions that you can create. But the context is historical context, it's physical context, it's social context, and for sure I'm leaving some context. This one is a project where, in a very beautiful way, the architects, what they do is they reproduce the form in a new material and a new language, but still inserting the architecture in a very natural way and in an existing context as well. Or here, reconstructing, it's already the second archaeological project, reconstructing an almost disappeared watchtower with scaffolding. So what it does is to do a scaffolding to hold the few rocks that are still left of the old watchtower, and at the same time it also already gives the same use in a way. Again, it is a watchtower where people can climb up and see the territory from up. Here the contextualization or the memory is more referring to the nature itself, trying to detach the architecture from the ground level and referring more to the vegetation and the surrounding trees. In this case, also the tree is very important. And maybe the photograph doesn't do all the justice, but the idea of the school trying not to be a building, but just a shadow, like covering the patio with a shadow and opening up all the school classes towards this tree and towards the common space. This is a housing project that is special in Spain, and we will see another example of this. In United States, it's very common to build in wood, in CLT wood. In Spain, it is something absolutely new. Traditionally, we build of stone, brick, concrete, but there is bigger and bigger worry of the carbon balance, and wood is also tested. So there are a couple of projects. Also, the first project of the factory housing used wood. But this is something that is coming to Spain, and this is not especially contextualized or referring to a memory because it's a new thing. But on the back facade we can see this architecture that both in its language and also in its use refers to old ways of keeping the houses cool. So this buffer area, this buffer zone that changes from from the winter to the summer, creating or shadow or this buffer area to keep the heat in, is something that we can find in the same area in the traditional housing in Girona. And this architecture clearly is trying to learn from the past and introduce these passive systems to new architectures. Other thing that we would like to stress or make stand out is that there is special care in materiality, the local resources and technologies in the architecture that we have awarded. And this often happens through quite artisanal solutions. And this is something that is a value that we think quite specific still of Spain, and somehow a little bit like against the times that we are living, that everything is more and more industrialized, everything is more and more standardized. So in Spain, it's still possible to design details and design new systems and parts of the buildings. This is the other example of the wooden housing. In this case, it's social housing. And here, not only the material, but also the spatial structure of the plan is very interesting. It responds to the technology, to the use of wood and the properties of the CLT, but it also responds to the disappearing of the traditional idea of a family being mother, father, and two kids. The family unit can be whatever, or the housing unit can be all kinds of people living together. So somehow the idea of the living room as a central space, or the bedroom as a place to only sleep, or in Spanish it's very very literal, because for example, a corridor is pasillo, which means a passing place. Kitchen is cocina, which is the cooking space. And the bedroom, well, bedroom is also quite a funny word, but it would be the sleeping space. So everything, all these rooms are named by actions that maybe they don't correspond anymore in the way that we use the spaces. And the idea with this project is that there are these equivalent spaces that all have a little bit different characteristics, basically the way how you enter or you leave the spaces, how they are connected to the terraces, how they are connected to the other spaces. But then the inhabitant anyway habits these places in a way, like kind of more liberal, more free way to, by furniture or by the way of placing the objects or the actions instead of obeying these names of the traditional housing spaces. In this case also, the study of how to use wood in a way that we can actually see the quality or feel the quality of wood has been getting special attention, and it's not easy at all with the Spanish regulations, but there is a very serious study behind this project which has given interesting results, also thinking that this is something that then other promotions may use. Also, they create this buffer zone with shade, which is absolutely important with the climatical conditions of Spain. This is a landscaping project using a recycled granite stone, recycled from urban situations with all these granite blocks, probably earlier formed city square that is now asphalt or some other granite. So these stones are normally stored somewhere, and in this project to make this landscape this viewpoint a little bit more accessible. This has been applied again in a very delicate manner, and also the other elements that appear, they are just a very, very thin and very delicate way of acting in this beautiful landscape giving to the Atlantic Ocean. This materiality, resources, technology also, in some cases, like in this house by Teda architects from Mallorca, what they do is they really study the local production. So the idea is that the material comes from close and is close production, but also has benefits the local communities of builders and artisans. This is a university campus in Basque Country, and here it's also an example of a reuse of a building, and just by make the climatical conditions of an old building, 70s, old university, aularium, by building a double facade, but making it so thick that it also adds up to the program and creates all the public, the common areas. Well, I don't have a cursor here, but in front of the building, and is both a climatical improvement, but also a spatial improvement, giving a lot of more space and uses for the building. Like I said earlier, in Spain, concrete is the material. Here, what we appreciated is the ingenious use of prefabricated elements, and somehow the idea that the building explains itself just by using these simple elements and showing how gravity works and how the weight of the different elements may allow us to fly further and cover the seats with a shadow. The prefabrication and the module here is somehow also the theme. This is the only project that is not in Spain, but in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, a university building built by Josep Ferrando. And here also the question is more the practical issues of the construction process, and then the very, very tidy result of working with the prefabrication. And the last project that I show you, it's also about prefabrication, but the resources are completely different, and the timing of the building is totally different, because this is the only ephemeral project that got awarded. It's a space for a participation project of a big area in the harbor area of La Coruña. And the idea was that during half a year there was this structure where different happenings could be made, and people could get information about the urban renewal project, and could also have their say and participate in the design of this new area. Using just simple scaffolding, that's something that you can reuse. It's not something that would be specifically made for this project, and then using just light and as thin as possible material to create a space. Here's still the collection, and now I would like to pass to the conversation part, because I'm a little bit fed up of my own voice at this point. So let's talk about it all together. Okay? Maybe we can leave this.
Yeah, please. So go ahead. Yeah, please come.
Yeah, como yo tengo, as I have a micro,
Yeah,
I can
I
sit
also
a
have a mic
bit
as well.
further.
Turn this on. So, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Eugeni. And thank you, Óscar. Actually, everything was fantastically beautiful. So, you know, I'm a Spaniard too. So I don't know, like maybe this is the moment for a little bit of country pride. And, oh, you know, like now I can feel myself nostalgic. The last picture was in my hometown. So this, I don't know. No, so thank you very much, lady. Actually, thanks. No, thank you. I mean, certainly the projects were very interesting. I think that you showed an interesting amount of projects with really high quality. But also, I would say that a kind of a very specific type of projects as well, right? So I would, from that point of view, basically what I would like maybe like to start the conversation with is by trying to understand your role as curators here as well, and your position as curators, and the kind of propositions that are like behind your curatorial work. Because in a way it is true that the Spanish Biennial of Architecture is different from other biennials, right? It's not as the Venice Biennale or as the Lisbon Triennale or Oslo, etc., in which you actually can commission projects and you select more or less whatever you want. Here the process is a little bit different, right? Like there is a sort of a competition process in which there is a jury. You receive like this massive amount of projects, and you end up like picking up those that you think are somehow like interesting, right? So there is a part, in a way, of panorama somehow of the production of the type of architecture that is like being produced at the moment in Spain, but certainly as well going from those 600 projects or whatever that were presented to the competition to the final 20 that you have been showing us. There is a very strong process of selection, undoubtedly, and a very particular lens. Towards like a Spanish architecture, you know, in a way, like this is a reading of what is happening in Spain. You know, it's not exactly what is happening. There is maybe like more diversity and so on, that what you're showing us here, which is a certain understanding of the type of practices that you may consider that are more relevant, right? So from that point of view, I wanted a little bit to understand better, maybe more explicitly, what was like behind your curatorial position to actually select this type of interventions, right? And there is I mean, I had the privilege to have a look to the catalog before coming here, and there are like, you know, in your explanations and in the text, etc., there is as well like a certain appealing to some form of practice, you know, right? There is, I remember by one member of the jury saying something about, oh, this is an architecture that is like certainly, I don't know, like the wording like calm and serene and so on, you know? I remember that you had a quote by Giuseppe Antonio Coderc, no, which is one of the most important architects of the Spanish post-war, somehow like claiming an attitude of being very tied to the ground and knowing very well what you do, etc. So there is a certain form of sensibility that you're somehow like trying to push forward, right? And I wanted to understand maybe like a little bit better, that you make more explicit what is like behind that type of sensibility, and in a way, why you think that that is important in this particular historical moment, and certainly as well in relationship to the overall theme of the Biennale, right?
Okay, many things you are asking, Roy. Let's see. I don't know if we will answer everything. Anna, Óscar, you help me, please, because for sure I will forget things. But one thing that you said is that the Spanish Biennial, and actually you're right, it's very different from the biennials that we are used to. Basically, because in the Venice Biennial or in the Lisbon Triennial, for example, it's the curator who invites. I mean, there is an invitation, and there are projects that are made on purpose for that event. And here it's the opposite. The curators somehow receive. And here there is one first step, that we receive a large amount, I mean, basically almost all the production of what is more or less significant in architecture, in this case in the last 3 years, okay? But not everything. I mean, there are just a few works that we thought they would be presented to the Biennial, and they were not. And this is something that you have to respect, because there are architects who maybe they don't want to be part of the Biennial, or maybe that, and this happens because, I mean, we are Spanish, and there are good things, but also bad ones. Some forget. Some, they just said that, oh, come on, it was the Biennial, you're right, I forgot, okay? This happens very, I mean, it's just 2 or 3 cases, but we know of friends of us that, hey, it's strange that we didn't see your works, and, oh, come on, really? When was it? Oh, yeah, I saw it, but I forgot, okay? But anyway, besides that, and then as curators, we respect those offices who say, hey, I don't want to be part of this panorama for whichever reason, okay? And then the word panorama, I think that explains very well somehow the tradition of the Spanish Biennial. Somehow, here we showed today 20 projects, basically, but it's good to go through the catalog and go also through the finalists and the selected projects, that they are altogether 160, because I think that that gives more an idea of what's happening. Okay, at the end, well, you have to reduce, well, for many reasons. Maybe I won't go right now into them, but you can imagine, no? But we already expanded the awarded projects. In the beginning of the Biennial, there used to be one awarded project. I mean, how do you explain what's happening? How do you explain what's the situation of a certain moment in Spanish architecture? And especially, how do you give that as a legacy for the future generations, that when in Spain, when somebody wants to know what has been happening in the last 30 years in Spain, what they do is that they go to the catalogs of the Biennial. And there you have the different sensitivities of each era. That they have a common line. I mean, this idea of Spanish architecture being very rooted to the context, to the materiality, to artisany, to society, etc., it's something that we are, well, we are very proud of, and it's been for a very long time like that, no? But at the same time, you can see specificities of each time, no? For example, when before the crisis of 2007, 2008, the previous biennials, when you now check what were the awarded projects, they are mostly huge museums, huge auditoriums, I don't know, big Congress palaces, do you say it like that? In small towns that now when you go to visit them, they are absolutely abandoned because they can't be paid. I mean, you can't pay an auditorium of 5,000 people in a village of 500 persons. I mean, and well, that gives an idea of what's happening, no? In our case, I think it is our way of doing, and I mean, if you, well, you know us, Roy, you know our work, you know our way of thinking, and you can see that it's very close to what we have awarded or selected at the very end. But there is somehow in Spain, there is a kind of feeling right now of maybe still because of being so fed up of those years of craziness before the well, in Spain we say the Lehman Brothers crack. I don't know if that's the word here, okay?
Yeah, it is.
But there's still this idea of coming back to the roots, coming back to the materiality, coming back to the small scale, to the tactile dimension of architecture. I think that that's something, I guess that from Anna's explanation today, I think that all the projects were somehow distilling that, no? But that's, we want to think that that's not only our way of seeing it, so our selection, but that it's a common feeling amongst most of the Spanish architecture that is being produced right now. So in a certain way, of course, as curators, you have your point of view and you somehow direct the results to what you think that should be the way to follow. But at the same time, we really have this feeling that we have been quite objective in a way. Maybe not, maybe I'm absolutely wrong. But
do I have the microphone on? Yes, I think so. Anyway, what a curator of a Spanish Bienal does is, and all of these kind of events, is to select a jury. And of course, that's already a declaration of intention somehow. They are not, somehow it may seem that Eugeni is saying that it's somehow an innocent process, but it is not, of course. I mean, but what we tried to do is to select a very plural jury. We were 11 jury members, if I don't remember wrong. Some were outside from Spain. Some were dedicating their time more for the academy and others more professionally. There was urban designers, architects, and like different profiles of architects. But I think that what our input and our preparation for this jury, and also then this common idea of what is interesting or what's correct or what's needed at the moment, is somehow the responsibility of doing architecture that would somehow lead to a better future, as naive as it may sound. Because what do the awards and biennials and exhibitions and these kind of collections of somehow remarkable architecture do? What they do is to set some kind of a standard or set models for other architects, other clients, other promoters, and the society in whole to follow. And somehow it's our small, it's the small power that we have against the capital, against political forces, against many things in this world, that they are not specifically for good architecture or for responsible architecture or so. So in a way here, what we like to think is that we have tried to act in a responsible way, showing models for future architects or the architects that surround us, and for the rest of the society, how things can be built or how quality of life can be improved and so on and so forth. So I guess we try to work from this kind of idea of the panorama, so to kind of gather together something that it's not a singular work, and it doesn't want to be the winner is one or two or three, but instead of that, a collection of architectures that could act as a model. Then we know that there are other models that are somehow very destructive for the world. So this is our only way to create a positive model from our point of view, of course.
Push that forward, yeah. Please go ahead.
Can you translate it me?
Sí.
Okay. Sorry. Hay un escritor español que se llama Juan José Millás.
There's a Spanish writer called Juan Miguel.
José Millas.
Sí.
Yeah, take it.
So there's a Spanish writer called Juan, no me acuerdo el nombre, José Miñas,
Que desde el 2008 ya no hay futuro.
that says that since 2008 there is no longer a future.
Yo más bien creo o pienso que estamos en un momento bastante importante en la arquitectura.
So I think that actually we're living in a very important moment in architecture,
En parte de la arquitectura, en parte,
in a part of architecture,
pero el cual, pues, en los periodos de crisis, como es este,
that in moments of crises like this one,
volvemos a lo que es los inicios, a lo primitivo, al material.
that we come back to sort of the moments, the initial moments, the material moments, sort of the beginnings.
Y, curiosamente, en parte de la arquitectura española ha dejado de creer en el progreso.
And in a certain way, architecture in Spain has lost its way to think about progress.
¿Sí? Refugiándose en lo que es la tradición del ladrillo, de la materia, de los materiales que eran, digamos, parte de la tradición.
Coming back to what was the hammer, the tradition, the materials that formed part of the Spanish tradition.
Y además es curioso, es como en otras épocas, como pudo llegar a ocurrir con el primitivismo de Picasso, ¿no? Por ejemplo.
So in relation to thinking about other periods such as that of Picasso and of primitivism,
Ahora, en los momentos, volvemos a esa materia, volvemos a la tradición para volver a buscar unos nuevos caminos.
so today we're coming back to that material to try and forge a new path.
Es muy posible que en los próximos años veamos una evolución hacia otros caminos.
So in the next few years, it's very possible or probable that we will find new ways or new paths.
Y que estas obras que hemos visto que son de pequeña y mediana escala, al final acaben reflejándose en grandes proyectos que tienen que ver con todos estos ensayos que estamos viendo ahora.
So these works that right now form a relatively small or medium scale, perhaps in the future they will become part of a larger scale.
Y sobre todo hay algo que creo que es lo más importante de todo, ¿no?
So there's something that I think that is most important of all,
Que es que la arquitectura vuelve a la gente. Los arquitectos vuelven a pensar en la gente, en la sociedad, y compartir con ellos lo que es la arquitectura.
So architects come back to thinking about people, about society, about communities, about neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Óscar. So yeah, I mean, I can continue. I'm supposed to moderate this talk, but actually also at the same time, I know that we are short of time and that probably you also have questions. And please do so, both those of you who are here in person and those of you that may be online as well. So maybe if you allow me, like I make maybe like one short thing that you may try to answer as quick as possible. And then also like Angela, if you want to post something, go ahead. But please do come forward and participate. So maybe yes, my very maybe my last question, considering the time, is really as well maybe a little bit about I mean on one hand what you propose, and you have explained us very well what you propose, but also like a little bit as well about what is like missing and what is like absent in the Bienal, right? And actually, it's the Bienal of Architecture and Urbanism. What you have showed us is fundamentally architecture, with the exception of one urban project, which is actually as well an urban project within a city, right? And somehow there was a total absence, it seemed, of projects that really took on the territorial complexities that in a way were behind the theme of the Biennial, right? And I would like to know maybe a little about why that is. In a way, it's like, on one hand, you may tell me, no, it's like projects were not presented, but also that in case that they were not presented, considering your involvement as well on Spanish academia, if you think that there is something that in a way may be missing there as part of what architects have actually been able to do and are able to do based on their existing disciplinary knowledge. And therefore, if you consider that something as well need to change in architectural, in Spanish architecture, and also like obviously like in other contexts that face like similar conditions, in order like to tackle these questions.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah,
And then I make a long question and then just like.
okay.
Sure.
Yes.
Yes.
No, the lack of more projects of urban design or urbanism, first of all, we have to remember somehow that in the Spanish context, the urban planning, the planning is a little bit out of convocatory in a way that it is, planning is a collective process in a very long-term timing, and in the Spanish Bienal, the regulations is that they have to be finished projects. So this is very difficult already in very many urban projects. They are actually never finished, or they are never realized in a way that that would actually meet with the. So there is a problem in the setting the question somehow, and that's for sure. And if we wanted to be really architecture and urbanism biennial, we should work on that direction also. Then there is also maybe what should worry us as a professional community is that less and less urbanism is done by architects. Our architects have less and less power maybe in deciding the territory from in the largest level. So that's something that I think that it is good for us to be critical about that. Of course, then in the Biennial, like Eugeni explained well, we receive the project. So then we don't receive that much of urban planning projects or urbanism projects. So very often it is this semi-small scale, so it's already something that is really happening already. At the moment there are not so many of those spaces also because there has probably been a lack of financing for these type of projects that would be finishing a coastal area or organizing a part of a city or something like that. But the very large-scale urban planning very difficultly would enter the Spanish architecture and urbanism biennial.
See, let me say one thing, because there's another thing lacking here. This is one, but we noticed that actually, and probably you have noticed by the scale of the projects that basically they are all small and medium, maybe in the American scale, not even medium, I mean small projects. And there are no big housing projects, big office buildings, commercial centers, etc., etc. And our conclusion, somehow, our thought about that is that architects are somehow losing that terrain in Spain, which actually we had it. I mean, we used to build the big office buildings and the big, well, commercial centers, I don't know if that big anyway, Spanish scale always. And that's something that somehow we have to worry about because, I mean, okay, it's very delicate and very precious what we showed today, but architects, if they, every time more and more they are in this reduced world, they will be less and less, their impact will be smaller and smaller every time, no? So here we have a problem, and then you may think, okay, and who's doing that? No, well, big corporations, engineering companies that, okay, nothing against them, but their basic interest is not building a better world.
Or better environment.
Or building for the society. So, I mean, all the goals that we saw that these projects were achieving, they are not in the list of these big corporations, and that's why, well, basically they don't appear because they somehow are in a parallel world that it's not ours, and that's a problem. I mean, we should think about it and see that, okay, what can we architects do to get that terrain back that we have lost? That's maybe one of the somehow, I don't know if well, negative aspects that we saw when having such a big amount of works and such a huge selection, that we saw that, hey, there's something wrong happening here and we have to react to that.
Sí, una pequeña puntualización. Yo es que creo que estos arquitectos no le interesan al gran capital.
He's saying that he thinks that these architects are not interested in sort of large capital.
Or the capital,
the capital doesn't interest in them.
Oh, they're not, yeah, the capital's not interested in them.
Porque de alguna manera la ciudad está en manos, digamos, de una hoja Excel, de unos números.
He's saying that the city is sort of geared by sort of numbers and finance.
Y esta arquitectura es más próxima, es una arquitectura que tiene más que ver con la gente y con la proximidad.
And this architecture has much more to do with sort of the people and proximity.
Por lo tanto, es muy difícil que las grandes corporaciones que están dominadas por economistas,
So it's the large companies that are sort of powered by economists and financiers.
les interese algo que lleva mucho tiempo hacer.
So it's hard to get them interested in something that takes a very long time to produce.
Porque ahora, evidentemente, lo que importa es economía y tiempo. Cuanto menos tiempo, más dinero se gana. Por lo tanto, estas obras no son, digamos, no entran dentro de lo que es la construcción de la gran ciudad.
So he's saying that now what's important is sort of economics and time. So the less time there is, the more money there is to be made. And obviously these projects require a lot of time, so it's hard to encourage them to make such things. Okay. Maybe we can open it up to questions now
let's
to the
open
audience.
it up. Yeah. Yep.
Another Spaniard.
I'm a Spaniard too.
Oh, come on.
Thank you. Thank you for the work and the exhibition today. I guess you have been working in like this project for a long time, more than 1 year, or 1 year and a half, I think, maybe more. I presume that it's about to conclude at some point, probably when the next Biennial starts next year. So I was wondering, like, if after all this process, like, you have found new directions or new research subtopics or new ideas to continue developing like this research in the following years. Thank you.
New is overvalued. No, I mean, talking seriously, yeah, of course, but somehow what these last comments pointed out that somehow we are in a talking of very delicate matters. Oops.
Maybe it's me. Let me turn this off.
Okay. Yeah, it was you. This is somehow what we have to kind of cherish or take care is that this wouldn't be marginal architecture. So now in somehow what we have made it in a Spanish architecture discussion context. So this is now the representatives of the awarded projects, and they've got a lot of push and a lot of publicity and so on and so forth. But anyway, there is this risk that this is a marginal architecture. So I think that these projects themselves, they all mark in these 20 studios lines for taking it further and it's also, in very many cases, it's work that they have been doing in a very constant way during years. To think of clearly new paths that this would take, I think that some of the lessons that we have been trying to underline here is this contextualization. It's something that you have to be alert all the time to react to the situations that are not only historical or only archaeological, or so as some of these examples may show. But it's somehow attending the factors and the different contextual elements that you have with care. Like taking care is somehow an attitude that architecture really has to adopt. And now we talk very much of like the kind of feminist urbanism and feminist attitude, but I would just talk more about this idea of taking care of the environment, taking care of the people, taking care of the result. One Finnish origin, but working in Norway, architect Rintala Egertsson, but Sami Rintala, he said in one of his talks that architecture has to be beautiful because that's the way that people love the buildings and take care of the buildings. So somehow also something that we very often forget to talk about, but a lesson to be learned and to be taken to the future is that we have to do beautiful things. So all these meaningful things of connecting, of thinking of sustainability, of using local producers, then there's also the added value of beauty that is something very necessary for the aspect of taking care, because then the architects and their work somehow take care of the society, but they also receive a care from the other side of the table, from the users and the people who then have to live and have to take these architectures and these environments further to the future. So I think that's somehow a lesson. It's maybe not anything new, but it's something that hasn't been talked so much in this very competitive and very publishing-oriented world of architecture, what's pop and what's top and so on. So I think that's important value anyway, and that's something that it's flourishing and it has always been there, but let's think that it's new, maybe. Yeah, answers are long.
Yeah, so thank you for a really nice lecture. I'm Canadian, so I'm very familiar with the urban and rural, but I think for us it's 80% in 1% of the land or something like that, so much more exaggerated. I think, kind of closing this off, I guess my question is, it seems like these past few years have been a real moment in architecture. You mentioned kind of slowing down, taking care, going back to local materiality. And I wonder if, kind of to go back to the theme of empty and full, if there is a kind of reversal that might have happened where instead of cities kind of applying ideas to the rural and being the source of dissemination of knowledge, if there was a reversal where maybe cities could learn from the rural and there's a kind of reversal of the flow of knowledge. I wonder if that's a kind of pattern that emerged or if there's some thinking that came out of the Biennale in that direction.
Maybe more than the Biennale in itself, but the coincidence in time is absolutely clear, is that the COVID epidemic, of course, made the dense areas look back to the empty areas. And this is something that generally doesn't happen. So in Spain, there is some kind of very clear autism from the dense parts towards the empty parts. It's some kind of a reserve, like land somewhere there, and then the city people cross it and think, how can anybody live here? And it is every time harder and harder to live. So I think that this consciousness of some models and some values that are present in the very very empty areas has got to the consciousness, but because of the pandemic. And that has forced the urban areas to look what's there on the other side. But on the other hand, there are other forces that are very, very harsh and very, very quickly changing that I don't know if this attention that now in very short term we have gained, if we're in time to learn any lessons, because, for example, in Spain there are large areas of agricultural production land that is changing to solar fields, which is, of course, energy-wise a great thing, but nobody is needed. There's no connection whatsoever to this new land use. Nobody is needed to operate it or to take care. This taking care part is absolutely lost in this case. So the problem is really drastic, and it's really important that we look to the whole territory as one, because we will need it all in the end, and we already need it all.
I think we need to close because of the time. So I would like to thank everyone for attending, certainly. I would like to thank as well Óscar, Eugeni, Anna for the lecture. Thank you, Nicolas, and thanks Yolande in absentia for her curation of this series of events. And certainly would like to invite you all to come to the next ones. The next one is going to be next Thursday. It's September 22. Let me check on the date so that it is correct. So it's September 22. So at 6 p.m. as this one. The topic will be co-authoring. It will be led by Anna Miyake and Annie Liu, who have edited the latest issue of Locke. And they will be joined by some of the participants that are like here in Cambridge, like both at Harvard and at MIT. So they will be accompanied by Timothy Hyde. They will be accompanied by Cristina Parreño Alonso.